Firstly, a very warm welcome to everybody who's joined us on this webinar today, where we're going to be talking about careers in medical writing. My name's Annette Keith, and I'm head of editorial here at Langland. And I'm joined by several of my colleagues in my team, all at various stages of their careers. And together, we're going to give you some insights into what we think is a really interesting and a fulfilling career choice for those people who really have a love for science and also a talent for communication and writing. So we've got kind of 5 main presentations for you today, followed by a question and answer session. I'm going to kick off by just explaining what medical writing is and where Langland as a company fits into that spectrum. I'm then going to pass over to Nicole Courtine, who's one of our principal medical writers, and she's going to discuss what it takes to be a really good medical writer. Sophie Bilton, our editorial team director, is then going to share the kind of opportunities that you could expect if you embarked on a career in medical writing. Mark Astick and Kelly Gallagher are then going to tell you what it's really like to be a medical writer. They're 2 of our senior medical writers who've been with us for a few years now. And finally, last but not least, we've got Nadia Cummins and Annabelle Calvert, who are 2 of our most recent recruits. And they can share their experiences of what it's like to start a job as an entry-level medical writer within Langland. And as I said, we've got a Q&A session at the end. So we've got the Q&A box within this Zoom webinar. So please do fill in any questions that you have along the way, and we'll cover those at the end. And they can be anything on general things about medical writing that you want to know, or about Langland specifically, because I think we've got about 45 minutes of content to discuss with you first, but really it just kind of scratches the surface of the kind of the wealth of information that's kind of available. So please do feel free to ask any questions that you have along the way. There's no silly questions. So I'll just kick off by saying, what is medical writing? And I'm going to start with a quote from this famous chap that you might recognize, Albert Einstein. And he said, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." And for me, this really is the crux of medical writing. What we're doing as medical writers is we're taking complex medical and scientific data and we're communicating it in a way that's meaningful and relevant to whatever a specific audience. So, I mean, this really for me is I come back to this quote so often, excuse me, because it really is, it's fundamental really to be able to understand that science and to be able to communicate it well. We need to be, as professional writers, we need to be doing the best job. We need to be making it easy for the reader. The reader or the listener shouldn't have to work to understand the concepts and the points we're getting across, because good communication is really simple and easy to follow. It's not easy to do, but it's easy for the recipient. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Now, medical writing might seem like a very niche kind of profession, and maybe some of you have only recently heard of it when you saw our adverts about this webinar, but actually it covers quite a broad spectrum of activities. So if you think about this spectrum on this slide, this shows kind of the spectrum of creativity involved in medical writing, I suppose. So if you look on the left-hand side, you've got medical writing, which is kind of on the clinical or regulatory side of things. That's about writing all the documentation that's associated with clinical studies, so the protocols that determine how the study is conducted, through to study reports, which report the results from all the statistics that get generated, and those then get sort of bundled up with a bunch of other regulatory documents and submitted to healthcare organisations who decide whether that drug should be licensed for use. Moving along towards the right, we've then got publications, and publications is about taking those clinical study reports, etc., and the analyses of those studies and writing them up for manuscripts or for Congress posters and sharing those new data with the wider healthcare community. And then on the right-hand side, we've got a very broad bucket that we call medical education, med-ed, and promotion, sometimes called medical communications. 2 terms are often used synonymously. And that's less defined, I suppose. There's lots of different kinds of communication materials that get produced in med-ed. So slide kits, interactive documents, animations, videos, podcasts, all manner of different types of things. And this is really where Langland sits. So publications are sometimes classed as medical education as well, but I've kind of I've shown it separately here because we don't do too many publications. We do the odd one, but it's not the sort of bread and butter of our work, whereas there are some agencies who really focus in on that particular skill set. So we're going to talk specifically about medical education today because that's our expertise. I should say also you could extend this spectrum out even further to the right and become more creative and less sort of data heavy, I suppose, but that is something called copywriting. And we do have an advertising team within Langland, and they have copywriters as well. So if anybody is interested in learning more about copywriting, then we can certainly put you in touch with one of our creative directors who could tell you more about that. So medical education is all about helping pharmaceutical companies to communicate around their drugs and around the conditions that those drugs treat to primarily healthcare professionals. So on this slide, you can see I've put roughly finger in the air, 80% of our content is for healthcare professionals. And this could include, just to give you some kind of examples, perhaps there's been a recent congress. We might develop some slides that then the representatives from the pharmaceutical company can then go and use those slides to discuss the new data with their customers, the doctors in their offices, and share that new information. We might perhaps develop a mode of action animation that shows how our new drug works for doctors to be able to understand that. Or maybe we film a video with a Q&A with a real top expert in the field, answering questions about perhaps what the best treatment options are for various different types of patients that other healthcare professionals that are perhaps more generalists can learn from. So those are some of the kinds of materials that we develop. Another really important audience are actually the pharmaceutical company staff themselves. So on the one hand, we know that those people who are within a pharmaceutical company to understand the conditions that they're working on, and they need to understand their drugs. So we develop training materials, whether that's interactive content or slide decks for presentation during their training meetings. That's a lot of the things that we develop as well. And then also some projects which a lot of writers really, really enjoy is something called advisory board meetings. So pharmaceutical companies don't just want to communicate to doctors, but they also want to learn from them. And so they sometimes will hold an advisory board meeting where they gather together say 8 to 10 top experts in the field to ask them questions about where their drug fits into the landscape, what new data mean for patients, et cetera, et cetera. And as a medical writer, even at a very early stage in your career, you can be sat around a table with the top 8 experts in the world about a particular condition, and it really is a great privilege to hear those conversations firsthand. And the medical writer's job would then be to write up the report of that meeting, which is not an easy job, but certainly a very interesting project to be involved with. And then finally, there's the patients. Now we do a little bit of information for patients. It's not so much outside of the US. It's actually illegal to be kind of promoting a drug to a patient. So if you go to the US, you've probably seen the adverts that come up that sort of randomly, tell you to ask your doctor about prostate cancer medications and things like that. That doesn't happen in the UK, and it doesn't happen in most of the world because we're not allowed to market direct to patients. But what we can do is tell them about their disease to help support them through that. We can, if they've been prescribed a drug already, we can provide information on that drug and what to expect. So we can do things like leaflets or animations or anything that really helps to support a patient during the course of their disease and their treatment. So in a nutshell, medical writing is really a blend of science and creativity, which means it's a great career option for science graduates who want to do something a bit more creative with their lives. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over now to Nicole, who's going to tell you what makes a good medical writer. Excuse me. Thanks.
Thanks, Annette. Hi, everyone. So I'm Nicole, and I've been working in this industry for about 7 years now. So I'm quite well placed to explain what makes a good medical writer and what companies like Langland will be looking for when they recruit medical writers. So to start with, you'll probably have a love of science, but will be more than happy to leave the lab behind. It may be that you've done a PhD and are now happy to never see another pipette again. I know I definitely was. Or you may be fresh from your undergraduate and really eager to keep learning. So medical writing is a fine art. It's probably not a fine art that you've heard of, but it definitely is a fine art. And it's one that combines creativity, so the writing, with the hard facts and the data. And so to do well in this industry, you will have kind of a natural talent for writing and communication. You may, like me, have enjoyed an eclectic mix of the sciences and English literature during your school days. And you probably really enjoyed tasks like writing your dissertation, or preparing posters and presentations during your undergraduate or any postgraduate degrees. You also love to learn new things, new data, new therapy areas. I've been working in the industry for over 7 years, as I said, and honestly, I can still say that I learn something new and interesting every day. It's just so varied. You'll also enjoy kind of digging into the data, and really importantly, you won't just take the data at face value. You'll kind of critique it. The data will inspire you to be curious and to ask questions to really understand what it means for the treatment landscape and also for patients. And then once you've understood that data, you'll be able to take it and turn it into a really concise, clear story that takes the reader on a journey. You'll probably also be a bit of a stickler. You'll sweat the details. Us medical writers love the details. And it's really important, obviously, that everything we produce is really kind of accurate and of the best quality. So you'll probably be the kind of person who corrects your friends and family's grammar, maybe on your WhatsApp chats. And if you appreciate a good grammar-based meme, as I clearly do based on the slide, then a career in medical writing is probably for you. And you'll also enjoy working as a team. The team is the foundation of all the great work that we do. Being a medical writer is not just about sitting at your desk and just writing. It's so much more. It's collaborating. It's being kind of open and communicating. It's brainstorming and planning, communicating with your teams and clients, and working really closely with experienced writers to hone your craft. And the reason, I guess, why all of these things are so important is because the materials that we develop have the power to impact patients' lives. And I've seen this impact over the course of my career. One example is at Langland, we do a lot of work in metastatic colorectal cancer. And a few years ago, analysis of several large phase 3 trials showed that a response to a certain class of therapy dramatically differed depending on whether your primary tumour originated in the left or the right hand side of the colon. And this is great because it means that treatment can be more personalised and it gives patients the best chance of survival. However, awareness of this impact of tumour location was only really known by the experts in the field, and it wasn't filtering down to the day-to-day jobbing oncologists. So part of our challenge at Langland was to communicate this data to a broader audience to support evidence-based treatment decisions in this particular therapy area. We achieved this in a number of ways. As these things often do, we start kind of with internal communications. We raise awareness about this data and its implication for patients, as Annette mentioned, kind of internally within the pharmaceutical company, so that employees are equipped with that information and they have that understanding for when they go and speak to healthcare providers and their customers. And so once that happened, we would then start to communicate kind of externally to healthcare providers. This may be through symposiums, international congresses, big oncology congresses, through kind of email communications. We prepare documents that medical science liaisons, they're kind of, that's a role within the pharmaceutical company, who would go and talk to physicians about the new data and explain what it means. And now, a few years later, the impact of this tumour location is well established in the field, and physicians are using this approach routinely to inform their treatment decisions in patients with metastatic colorectal cancer. And I really think that shows the power of kind of this industry and the work that we do as medical writers in terms of actually helping patients day to day. So now I'm going to hand over to Sophie, who is going to describe what a career in medical writing can offer you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Okay, so Nicole has just told us an awful lot about what we need to see from you, but please keep in mind that there are plenty of opportunities that this industry and a career in this industry can offer you too. So I am sure if I asked this little one what they wanted to be when they grew up, the answer probably would not be medical writer. I don't know about you, but I certainly didn't know about this career when I was straight out of my undergraduate degree, and I didn't even know about it when I was doing my master's and my lab work. It was only really when I was looking for a job that I found out that it existed. So I suspect very few of you would have said, when I want to grow up, I want to be a medical writer either, but perhaps we should be. So what we're going to do now is take a quick look at what comes across the virtual desk of a medical writer and see what opportunities are there. So first of all, just to reiterate what Nicole and Annette have been saying, this career will give you a great deal of variety. You're absolutely going to need those glasses and keep paying attention. So this can range from the variety that you expect, things like lots of different disease areas and things like that, but also many different types of work. As Annette was saying, this can range from things like simple papers and more technical documents, all the way up to multimedia pieces, perhaps even augmented reality, and then slide sets and visual pieces like that. But also, this is things like different audiences. So again, as Annette was saying, 101, we would be looking to provide materials for doctors, maybe some patients, but also healthcare companies as well, so that they are internally trained. So every day is going to be different. You don't have to worry about that. But one thing I would absolutely always recommend, top tip here, is whatever you do, write your day plan in pencil, because no matter what you do, it's going to change a little bit. That little rubber at the end of the pencil is absolutely required. You're going to need to move things around. So one of the best things that could come across your desk as a medical writer is the opportunity to potentially leave it for a little bit. I once calculated that I spent around 11 days of the year in flight, traveling to different parts of the world to learn and to assist clients in communicating effectively about their data. Now, this is usually at congresses, which can be the most exciting and exhilarating place to learn about the cutting edge of science. It's really thrilling to be in the room where it happens, when the data is released, and being there when the client learns about it. It's a really exhilarating experience. Now, of course, it's usually travel via Zoom, but hopefully that's going to change and we will start opening up a little bit more and seeing a little bit more of that travel as well. But of course, one of the other things that you're definitely going to be aware of at these congresses, as well as wider, is being at the cutting edge of science. You don't have to leave behind a passion for science just because you aren't in a lab. As Nicole said, if you are ready to put down the pipette and ready to still maintain that interest in the outcomes of those experiments, this could be very well the career for you. Now, the opportunities to learn and interact with professionals and experts aren't even capped at the scientific experts. You also have in-house experts and really top of their game clients who can help you hone your craft and really mean that you are developing materials that meet the needs of the end user and do something valuable that you can be very proud of. Now, Nicole has mentioned the team, and that is very important from what we want from you, because we need you to be a team player, but it's also something that you should be very keen to expose yourself to in terms of your development. It's a benefit for you too, because it's important to grow and develop from that strength of the people around you. It's the backbone and the support of all our day-to-day activities, and it will help you grow and progress. This is something that a couple of the other team members are going to give you a few more insights into a little bit later on. But it's definitely something that I have personally really enjoyed about the companies and the teams that I've worked in, because no medical writer is an island. We do all work together to develop, but it's an extremely valuable and important thing for us to benefit from as well. Now, this, I think, is the very, very biggest thing for me that I absolutely have to have from a job to be able to be comfortable continuing to work there. The feeling that I'm doing something valuable. Now, I don't promise you that you are going to come to any company at all and say, I'm revolutionizing healthcare by lunchtime. However, you will help to make it better with every little project that you do. It's really important to improve the lives of patients and elevate healthcare, and being a part of that, even a small part of it, really can give you a really strong sense of achievement. And that is, of course, extremely valuable when you need to push through for that last data check and it's taking you forever. It's really important to remember exactly what we are aiming for with this, which is exactly as Nicole said, to really improve the lives of patients. And having that in the back of your mind, knowing that is the end game, can get you up for that 9 a.m. meeting as well, which is really, really valuable. So overall, that's what we are hoping that you might be able to achieve from a career like this. But of course, that doesn't give you a great deal of detail about the day-to-day. So what we're going to do next is hand you over to Kelly and Mark, who will be telling you a little bit more in detail about what it's really like and what they do. So with that, I shall hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Sophie. Hello, everybody. So yes, my name is Mark, and I am a senior medical writer at Langland. Just a little bit about my background, just to say, so I did a PhD and then a postdoc in neuroscience, and so I spent about 10 years overall in the lab. And so I've been now a medical writer for about 3 years, and I like to describe myself as being in the process of being a recovering academic, which is how I sometimes put how my job experience has been. But what I'm going to do today is just share with you a few of the examples of the day-to-day work that we do, and the kind of 3 key highlights for me in my 3 years so far with Langland. So as I say, I come from an academic background and I spent a long time in the lab. And so one of my main concerns when I was moving from an academic career into a writing career was, what would actually be involved in the day-to-day. And, you've already had a really nice introduction from Annette and Sophie and Nicole about the kind of projects that we're involved in and the work that we're involved in. But obviously there was a concern for me that I would lose that kind of variety of being in the lab, learning something new every day, trying new experiments and, being up to date with all of the latest research and so on and so forth. But the thing that I really want to drive home with my 3 points here is that it's not all writing. So obviously the writing is important and you do spend a fair amount of time at your desk working on various projects in PowerPoint and Word. But there are a lot of things that you'll do day to day which are, really interesting and develop your skills in different ways. So the first thing that I want to draw attention to, and Sophie's already spoken about this, is the travel. You will get to travel as a medical writer. And as we all know, we're lucky in that most congresses tend to be in the summer and they tend to be in very nice places. And so 2 of my personal highlights so far have been to go to congresses in Barcelona and Lisbon. And obviously you're there for the client and you're working, through the Congress and stuff. But what's really great about this is that you get to stay in touch with the academic community, the scientific and medical community. If you love nothing more than, wandering around a poster session and speaking to researchers and doctors, then, you'll be able to do that. And if nothing else, you still get access to all the free coffee. So it's definitely worth going. And so I've really loved the opportunity to travel, and hopefully in the post-COVID world, that's something that we'll be able to get, back into, going to congresses and meeting people face to face, discussing the science and looking at the latest data being released, which is really exciting. The second thing that I just want to discuss here is I wasn't actually directly involved in the moon landings, but this is probably the best image to show the kind of project that we worked on. So this for me has been a bit of a different project that we worked on. A client was launching a new product, and they were having a meeting with all of their staff to detail the the information around the product and what they were expected to do and how it was going to work. And the theme for the meeting was a space theme, and they asked us to put together a motivational video. And this for me was absolutely great because I'm a bit of a space nerd, and I got to go through all of the NASA archives, and then we got to do a little bit of script writing. We got to speak to the doctors and get them to say things, about the product, and then we were able to also put them in a situation where they were maybe giving a press conference or where they were in space reporting back. And then we put it all together into this really nice video, and it went down really well with the client and everybody loved it. And to be honest with you, it's one of the most interesting pieces of work that I've done so far, and I really would call that out as a highlight for me and an example of something a bit different that we do from the day to day. And then the final thing here is something which we call Wonderful Things of Interest Club. The Wonderful Things of Interest Club is more of to speak to the kind of culture that we have within the agency. And that's to say that Wonderful Things of Interest Club is a lunchtime discussion club where what we do is we get together and people bring along things that they've seen that are interesting in health or science or research, or in the public domain. And then we just get together and discuss, what we think is good, bad, what we can take from different examples into our work. And the best way to describe maybe is this is the closest that you'll probably get to a kind of journal club kind of experience that you would have in the lab environment. But yeah, this is a really fun club, and we have a lot of these little things to help you stay in touch, with what's going on outside the areas that you're working in, and so you can really feel engaged with the science community as a whole. So those are the kind of three little highlights from me, and now I'm going to hand over to Kelly, who's going to discuss the progression of a medical writer. So thank you very much. Over to Kelly.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm Kelly. I'm another senior medical writer, and unlike Mark, I was very quick to leave the lab, and I soon left after my master's and became a medical writer, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I'm going to talk about what you can expect over the first year or 18 months as a medical writer. So I think when people join, they find it a little bit daunting, the idea of getting up to date on the sort of 2 therapy areas or so that they are working on. But I think over time they realize that they actually become kind of like an expert on those quite quickly. And your team that you work with will also recognize this. So we tend to work in teams where there'll be one medical writer and then a senior medical writer. And then we also have the account side as well. So they tend to be more involved in the project management. So that's things like budgets and timelines, and they'll really rely on you to provide input on like the scientific aspect to help them do their job. So this all kind of translates into confidently communicating with your clients. So we tend to have meetings with our clients at least once a week, and we'll update them on the status of the projects that we work on. And you will be involved in updating kind of on the projects that you're responsible for. So this kind of just allows them to understand how things are going and ask any questions. Through all of this work, you'll be constantly sort of improving your writing. So we make sure that our review process is really kind of detailed, and we kind of give really good feedback and try to make sure that everyone understands what they need to do and everything's really clear. And we also will make sure that everyone receives a really clear brief, and we kind of always encourage people to ask questions as they go along to make sure they know what they're doing. So this also kind of falls into learning from your seniors. So of course you'll get the senior writers reviewing your work, but there's also senior people on the account side, and they'll be reviewing for kind of client expectation, making sure we meet that, making sure we meet kind of the client needs with each project that we work on. So one thing that I think people think they're a master of before they join, but there's still so much to learn, is PowerPoint and Word, which is what we tend to do most of our work on. So yeah, there's just tons of kind of tips and tricks that you don't realize when you're in your degree. I think I look back at my dissertation and think, oh my God, that formatting is horrendous. So you'll learn a lot, and you'll learn how to make things look really pretty and smart. So yeah, go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So just to give you an idea of how your day-to-day tasks will change as you progress. So when you first start, you'll tend to be given quite simple, straightforward pieces of work, things that don't require a huge amount of background knowledge, and things that people can kind of quickly brief you on, and you'll feel kind of sort of able to complete that piece of work. But as time goes on, you'll be involved in more complex projects that involve your expertise and your knowledge of the therapy areas that you work on. Like I said before, we tend to have meetings with our client once a week. And when you start, you can kind of update them on the status of your project. But as you kind of progress and learn more, you'll be able to have kind of more in-depth conversations with your clients, and kind of have that sort of more discussion around the data. And then beyond that, you can also go on to sort of challenge their ideas, have a much more sort of detailed conversation, which kind of sounds scary at first, but hopefully over time you'll have built your kind of trust with the client, and they'll really value your opinion on things. So it all comes quite naturally. And then finally, when you first start, you'll be kind of guiding other writers. But once you kind of have that expertise and knowledge, when a new writer joins your account, then you can sort of onboard them and explain things to them. And that really helps cement your knowledge and realize how far you've come. And then in like a more senior writer position, you can then go on to line manage people, which is a really great opportunity. And it really shows you, again, how far you've come and what you've learned. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what you'll be working on if you do choose to become a medical writer. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Annabelle.
Thank you, Kelly. So me and Nadia are now going to talk you through the first few weeks and months at Langland as we experienced them. We are both medical writers at Langland, and we entered the industry through two different routes. So I did a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from the University of Bristol about a couple of years ago now. During that time, I did a year-long placement in a lab in Brussels, which, while I enjoyed it, I realised wasn't really what I wanted to do as a career, as research. Following that, there was the COVID-19 pandemic. During that time, I set up a blog to help inform my family and friends about the virus. I really enjoyed writing the blog, so I looked into science communication as a career, and that's how I discovered Langland and MedComms.
And I'm Nadia. So yeah, I started in the same week as Annabelle, which was late last year, but in my undergrad and joining, I'd been actively working in for about 7 years or so, doing neuroscience research. So that included doing my PhD and some postdoctoral research as well, before I decided to jump ship and enter the MedComms industry. And so Annabelle's going to talk about how she found her first few weeks at Langland.
Thanks, Nadia. So me and Nadia both started at Langland within about a week of each other, 8 or 9 months ago now. And one of the things that I noticed when I started was how friendly and welcoming everybody is. At Langland, most writers work on multiple accounts in different therapy areas, and this means that you get to know people very quickly because you work with multiple different teams. But everybody in all of my teams was extremely helpful. Whenever I had a question, I knew there was someone I could message. In addition to that, at Langland, new starters get a starter buddy. So that's a medical writer, either at your level or one level above, who can help with informal support as you settle in. So any questions you have, anything you're not sure on, you can catch up with them and ask. You also have regular, more formal catch-ups with your line managers to assess how things are going as you settle in. So at each stage of the process, you feel very supported. Could I have the next slide, please? One of the other things that happens at Langland is, as discussed, I think, by Sophie and Nicole already, everything we do as part of a team. This means that there's a lot of communication between team members. So you get Teams messages, you get emails. There's also a lot of video calls to discuss things with people and with the clients. What this means is that me and Nadia both started remotely, but it felt like we knew everybody really well within about a month or so, because we just had so much communication with them, and that was really nice. We don't work independently here, we work all together as part of a group. So the learning curve at Langland is steep. As a medical writer, there is a lot to learn. Most obviously in terms of the science. Normally when you start at Langland, you'll get given some background reading on the therapy areas that you're going to work in. This helps to get up to speed, but there's no substitute for starting on active projects. More on that later. In addition to this, there's processes and terminology that we use at Langland that can take a while to get your head around. When you first start, you can't expect to understand everything immediately. So, more on the active projects. In my first couple of days and weeks at Langland, most of the projects and tasks that I did were data checking, proofreading, referencing, which is really helpful both for other team members and for you, because it's really good to be able to understand more about the therapy area through proofing materials other people have written before you start writing your own materials. But one of the highlights for me about Langland is the fact that within 3 or 4 weeks, I did my first ever project that I wrote myself, which was very exciting. It was 6 podcasts on infectious disease. Each one was in a different disease for the antibiotic that we worked on. And while it was a steep learning curve, it was really fun, and it was really rewarding to see how the podcast progressed and to listen to the final product. But also, because I worked on all of the 6 podcasts, I got a really good understanding of all of the main indications for our drug, which is really helpful going forward. Another thing that is very noticeable about Langland is that there's a focus on growth and development. I'm not going to go into this too much because Nadia is going to talk about it later. But even in the first few weeks, you can expect to set goals during a probation period. This is really helpful because it means that you know what to expect and you know what's expected of you. And also, you know kind of what to work towards. It's good for growth and development. I should also probably explain the pot plant. So one of the perks of working at Langland is that from time to time we get presents in the post, which is very exciting. You never know quite what they're going to be. You have someone emails you to say, can you confirm your address? And then you get sent something in the post. It's very exciting. At Valentine's Day, we got sent a plant. It's apparently very hard to kill, but I'll update you on that depending on how it goes. I'm very good at killing pot plants. I can't promise that if you start at Langland, you'll also get a pot plant, but you'll probably get some sort of present somewhere down the line. And I'm now going to hand you over to Nadia, who's going to talk about the first few months at Langland.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess continuing on with that theme of development, I think that's really the key word that describes the first few months, at least from my experience, just because there is so much to learn. Every project's different. And so once the first few weeks were kind of, finished and I'd found my feet, that was really helped by setting goals, which probably doesn't sound like a very exciting thing, but I found it really useful to structure what things to focus on, so it never gets overwhelming. And it's also really satisfying to then be able to track your progress and see how, you can now really easily and confidently do something which just maybe 3 weeks ago seemed quite difficult. So to support that learning, there are a lot of training opportunities at Langland as well, and we're really encouraged to take the time to do them. So I've put a few examples on the slide that just kind of show the breadth of training there is, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And one of the best things I think about these courses or programs, depending on what it is that they're really tailored to what we need, as individuals, based on the experience that we bring when we start. So it's not like there's some, compulsory checklist of trainings that you just have to do regardless of, your knowledge, but rather they are there for if and when we need them. So as an example, because I came from an academic research background, I really didn't know much about the pharma industry. I'd never, worked with them in any capacity. So just probably a few weeks in, I think, after I started, I did this half-day Intro to Pharma course. So that's run by an external trainer. And that was extremely useful to put our work into context and to help me understand various terminology and processes that are, unique or specific to the pharma industry. And these training opportunities are a nice mix of formal events, so like that course I just mentioned, as well as self-guided learning. And that's kind of, quite flexible. You can do that in your own time. Maybe there's a week that's a bit less busy, or there's something quite specific that you need to do soon, but you don't really know how to yet. And so those options are there as well. So it's never a chore and it never becomes too much. Another thing that I found to be a good opportunity is the option to work across disciplines. So we here today, we're all from the medical strategy and education discipline, but Langland actually has 4 different disciplines with different areas of expertise as well as some overlap. When I started, one of my projects was working with the advertising discipline. So it was a joint account between MSc and advertising. And in my case, after a few weeks on that, what I found was that I actually prefer MSc. So I didn't continue on that particular project for too long. But I think the key there is that I had the option to. So, it depends on what you enjoy and where your interests lie. And then you can kind of switch around when there's, obviously a pause point in the project. So overall, since joining Langland, I've been really well supported from day one. And obviously, as Annabelle said, that's despite working from home the whole time. But everyone's really friendly and encouraging. And there are good training programs in place, and they help build up that formal knowledge that is, very much in conjunction with working on real projects straight away. And that's really satisfying and surprisingly fun. So I'll hand back to Annette now.
Thanks, Nadia. So thanks, Nadia. Thanks to everybody for presenting on that. I think hopefully everybody who's dialed in has got a bit of an insight into our world from that variety of presentations. So just to wrap up, in terms of the presentation content for this, what we hope you've learned today is that medical writing is an interesting and varied career where you get to use your scientific knowledge and your creativity every day. It's not all about being stuck behind a desk. You'll never stop learning. I think that's really, all of us on this call are very passionate about that. We like to learn new things all the time, and it's definitely true in this career. You never stop learning. Even after 17 years, I'm still learning new things. The career path is really well defined. There's plenty of opportunities for progression. There's also, I should say, opportunities to kind of tweak the direction of your career path along the way. But it's very well defined. It's very clear what you need to do to progress, and you can really see that happening. And I think finally, just hopefully we've sort of showed to you that Langland is a really great place to start your career and indeed to continue it. So we do have open roles open at the moment, but for those of you watching on demand or who perhaps aren't ready to apply for a job yet, it's always worth getting in touch with us, because we're always looking to recruit at that entry level. We're always looking for new talent. So just because we don't have a role advertised doesn't necessarily mean that we're not interested in hearing from you. Arnie and James Bond probably don't have the credentials we're looking for, especially because Arnie seems to have spelled his name wrong on his CV. So that's definitely a big red flag for us. But yeah, like I say, hopefully several of you do, and you'd be interested in applying for some of our open roles. You can find us on LinkedIn if you just type in Langland. The branding, I think, is quite distinctive, so you should be able to find our jobs listed there. You can go to our website, publicislangland.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at Langland Life, or you can look any of us up individually. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'd be very, very happy to connect with anybody who wants to learn a bit more. We've now we're going to open the discussion for a Q&A. We've got some questions come through on the chat, so maybe we'll take down the slides and everyone can show their faces, and I'll direct some questions at everybody here. So feel free to keep adding them if you've got more things that you want to know. There's a couple of questions, first of all, on what qualifications people need to have. I don't know, Sophie, whether perhaps you want to take that one?
Absolutely. I think there is a little bit of a misperception that you absolutely have to have a PhD. But what we really want to see is a passion for science and skills in science. So you don't have to have a PhD. It's great if you do, but a solid degree in a biomedical science would be a must. But I think something we absolutely do need to see as well is some kind of passion for writing as well, because that is a craft that you don't necessarily show with just your degree. So something like, as Annabelle said, do you have a blog? Do you have anything that you've edited as part of your extracurriculars? Anything like that where you can show us a passion for writing is also just really top-notch and very valuable.
Thank you. And there is another question just looking about atypical entry points like mid-level academics. And I think both Mark and Nadia had already had quite some years in the lab as postdocs before starting their careers as medical writing. So really, it's very broad. You can join straight from your degree, or you can have several years in the lab, or anywhere in between. It's all very useful. So that's absolutely fine. Just looking at these questions. So one of the other questions, I think I'll just answer quickly, and if anybody else wants to add to it, then please do, was about, is the purpose of medical writing, is it mostly for promotion of a product? So I can explain here that we typically work for two teams within pharmaceutical companies. So we work for medical affairs teams or for the commercial or marketing teams. The commercial and marketing teams, their job is to sell a product. The medical teams, that's not about that. And I think the world in which we're living in today, I think pharmaceutical companies recognizing more and more that their role is not just to sell a product, but to actually support the care of patients with specific diseases. And their medical team really is very focused on that. Notwithstanding that, the commercial team do have targets to sell their drugs, etc. However, the pharmaceutical industry is very, very heavily regulated. And it's not the case like 50 years ago, a drugs rep would take a doctor down the golf course and, have a nice day hitting some golf balls around and, hope that the doctor will prescribe his drug as a result. And that is absolutely not allowed anymore. There's a lot of rules and regulations, what you can say, what data you can show. We, in the pharmaceutical industry, are much more regulated than, an academic is, and a doctor who does their own study and writes their own publication, for example. We're not allowed to say, but very, very specific example, we are not ever allowed to say that a drug is safe because, of course, all medicines are associated with some degree of risk. Yet, if you're a professor in an institute and you write a paper, I've seen it many times written, this is a safe drug, and in the pharmaceutical industry, we are not allowed to say that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We could probably do a 3-hour webinar on compliance alone. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
I just say that sometimes you can't even give away a free pen. That's too far.
Absolutely true.
No, not even stuff the golf. You can't even give away the free pen.
That is very true. That is very true. So another question about what kind of congresses. Let me read it exactly. What do you exactly seek in a congress, and what type of congresses do you usually attend? I wonder, Mark, I know you're passionate about congresses. Would you like to take that, maybe share a bit about the sort of types of work we do around congresses to give a bit of an insight on specifically what we're doing when we're attending them?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So when we attend congresses, there's probably I would say there's three major pieces of work that we do. So the first is we do things called Congress highlights, where we go to the scientific sessions with the aim being to report back to the client. So a pharmaceutical company can't afford to send all of their researchers and all of their medical teams to a congress. So we can go basically on their behalf and make sure that we write up the reports of all the latest data, everything that's interesting and relevant to them. So that's really interesting because you get to go to all of the sessions and talk to all the scientists and go to all the poster sessions and things like that. The second thing that we do is that we often we help to put together the content for and help to run industry sponsored symposia. So this will be where one of our clients would like to, share some information about the latest clinical trials data or so on and so forth, or as Annette says, talking about educating doctors on what's available to them and what the new and upcoming treatments are. And so with that, it will be a case of, we get together an expert panel and we help them to develop their slides, and then we help on the day with facilitating the meeting and making sure that everything runs smoothly. And then the third thing that we do around Congress time is advisory boards. So sometimes our clients will need to know what experts think about their clinical trials, what they think about their products, and where they're going to sit within, the landscape, how they can be of most benefit to patients. And obviously congresses are brilliant for this because it means that you can have hundreds of experts all in the same place at the same time. So you can organize a meeting where you get all of these experts together and they sit around the table and they share their opinions, and your client will often be there and they'll be in the room and they can listen firsthand, but you'll also develop reports so that it can be distributed to the team. So yeah, and in terms of the types of congresses that we go to, it depends upon the client. For me, I work mostly on oncology accounts, so the congresses that I go to tend to be the big oncology congresses around the world. But if you work in another field, then obviously you'll be going to look at whatever the main congresses are and whatever is interest for the client in that particular area. So that's the situation with congresses, and you drink a lot of coffee.
Thank you, Mark. There's a few questions. I thought, Nicole, maybe you could take a few questions on sort of the application process and maybe talk a bit about the writing test.
Yeah, sure. So what typically happens in terms of the application process is that you would send in your CV and a little bit of a cover letter explaining kind of why you're interested in medical writing and why you're interested in Langland. And then we would review your CV, and if you had kind of the qualifications and the things that we were looking for, we would send you a writing test, and that is to test your ability to understand a bit of data. It's based on a single publication, and your ability to communicate that data essentially back to us in the form of an article. And I would say just really take your time with that writing test. Just read around the publication that's provided. Make sure you really understand the data, because going back to the wise words of Albert Einstein, if you don't understand the data, if you don't understand the information, you're not going to be able to write about it. And it's quite obvious when reviewing if someone hasn't completely got the data. So do take the time to get your head around the data and understand what it means. If you've got someone you can chat about, someone in your family or your friends that you can chat about the data with, that's always good as well. So you'll send the article to us, and if it kind of ticks all our boxes in the sense that has it got a clear and logical flow, is all the right information captured, have you picked out the key points of the publication, have you thought a bit about the implications of the data. If that's all in there, then there's a good chance that we will invite you for an interview, and for that interview you'll be asked to prepare a set of slides to communicate the findings of that same publication that you wrote the article on. And again, similar in terms of tips, similar to what I just recommended for the article, making sure you really understand the data, that you've put together your presentation in a logical way that has a clear story, you've explained things well, you've picked out all the relevant aspects and the key data from that publication. And that usually is presented kind of at the first part of your interview, and then we'll have a discussion about that and then ask you various other questions. And importantly, you have the opportunity to ask us if you have any questions about Langland in particular. I think it's important to note that agencies differ. They can differ quite a lot in some instances, so it's important that you find the agency that fits you best, as well as us kind of finding the right writers for our particular agency. And if that's successful, you'll probably be invited back for another interview to meet a couple more of the team and kind of get a sense of the culture. We're really keen that you understand what life's like at Langland, and if that all goes well, then you'll be made an offer.
Thanks, Nicole. Hopefully that answers everybody's questions. There's a question here. I might take this one about how somebody has asked that they spent most of the time in the lab, so how can they prove that they can work effectively in a team if they don't have much experience with it? And I think I'll just broaden that out in general. When we're looking at entry-level positions, we're not looking for someone who is the finished product. that it is a very niche industry. Nobody who's coming into an entry-level role, it's almost a training position, really. So I think, it's more about a mindset. We would, ask you some questions in interview, see how your mind works, see what you think about these things. But we're across the board, not just about this aspect of teamwork, but there's an element of the writing test is very fundamental. It's fundamental to any medical writing job. I would be very suspicious of any agency who doesn't give a writing test to any applicants at all levels, to be honest with you, because that really does demonstrate a level of skill. But we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for what's the word? The other word beginning with P. Potential. That's what we're looking for. Hopefully I can write better than I can speak. But yeah, we're looking for potential, and there's certain things that are really critical, and other things which, just by talking to people, we get an idea of whether we think that they're likely to be able to grow those skills. So I wouldn't worry too much about, whether you've ticked every single box. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
I think in terms of working with the team, what's also important is kind of understanding that is agency life, and also that you're happy and willing and open to working in a team. People work in different ways. Some people work better kind of, when they're not in a team, like others, they prefer to work in silos. So I think it's more about, being open. There's going to be lots of communication with your team, and knowing that is part of the role and something you'll have to do. Being open to that is kind of more important than having that experience at that entry level.
I think, just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one more question, and apologies to everybody whose questions I didn't get around to, but again, please do get in touch with us after this webinar, and we'll be very happy to answer any further questions. We're also recording it, so we'll make this available elsewhere. But the last question is about, someone has asked if graphic skills like Adobe Illustrator are necessary for medical writers. I'm happy to take that, but I don't know if somebody else wants to answer that. Maybe I'll just take it. I think for me, medical writing is such a diverse career, and it's such varied skills required. I think we don't typically need to be able to work with graphic design programs or anything like that. But it is true that having an eye for making things look visually appealing is definitely advantageous. We do a lot of PowerPoint decks. When you just think about communications these days, most things are sort of more bite-sized visual kind of content rather than very long reports, and that is probably the bulk of our work. So being able to present data in an interesting and compelling and visually appealing way is a really, really valuable skill for a medical writer, and something we would also look for. To Nicole's point about doing slides in a writing test, we're not looking for people who are just going to write a list of bullets on a slide. Something that makes it compelling visually would definitely get some more brownie points from us there. We're pretty much bang on time now, so like I said, please do get in touch with us if you're interested. We're on LinkedIn as individuals. We're on LinkedIn as Langland. Follow us at Langland Life on Instagram, and at publicistlangland.com is our website address. So hopefully you've enjoyed the presentations today, and they've proved interesting. So thanks so much for your attendance, and good luck with your careers. Bye for now.